Everyone. Well, here it's afternoon, but good morning there. For those of you who are in California, I'm going to assume you have better weather, or at least warmer weather than we have here. Wherever you are, though, it's good to see you and welcome to this series. And thank you for that very nice introduction, Sherelle. When you take 25 years or 30 years of your life and you compress it into 3 sentences, you just go, oh, that's pretty impressive, I got to say. It only took me about 30 years to do all of that. Um, and like the introduction said, I normally write about Hungarian Jews. My last book was on Budapest. That's really what my expertise is, but I have other interests as well. And the involvement of Jews in culture in Europe and America is another one of my interests. That's why I enjoy speaking on this topic. But if you are Hungarian or if your family is Hungarian, I know a lot about where you came from and who you are, and yes, jól beszélek magyarul, etc., etc. Now this series, well, first of all, I should also say thank you to the Rosen family for sponsoring this series and for sponsoring me as the scholar in residence. It's really a pleasure to be part of this wonderful online program. Really is. So this particular series, Jews on the Small Screen, we're going to talk about in 4 sessions about the relationship between Jews and television, the small screen. So I want to be very clear what we're going to do, but I also want to be clear what we're not going to do. This is not going to be a catalog of every single television show that in some way is connected to Jews. That could take a year. What I've really tried to do is to focus on certain particular themes that have emerged from this decades-long and complex array of television shows that have been aired for the last 60, 70 years, and to highlight a few things about them and to see how Jews have been represented on television. So I should say from the outset, by way of introduction, I mean, television, I'm going to assume that television is something very familiar to all of us. I was going to say, I assume most of us have watched television. No, I'm going to assume that all of us have watched television. Television is very much a part of who we are. I suppose if you're below a certain age, watching television might be something a little bit, a little quaint and nostalgic. But for most of us, television is television. We know what we mean when we see television. So let me say just a word about the medium of television and how it relates to other media. And that's going to be, and I'm going to tie that into something about Jews on television. As media, as different media, as different forms of communication and entertainment go, I would say that television is more like radio than it is like movies. Now visually, we tend to associate watching television with watching a movie. Video images, we're watching screens. But I think television has something in common with radio that it doesn't have in common with movies in the theater. Going until relatively recently, going to see a movie in a theater was a very public event. You leave the house, you get dressed, you sit in a room with dozens or scores or hundreds of people you don't know and people you've never seen before and maybe will never see again. That is, it's a quintessentially public activity. If you're watching a funny movie, you're sitting and laughing with a room full of people you don't know. Or if it's a sad movie, you're crying or you're having some kind of emotional reaction. Television is much more private, like radio. Think about it. Before there was television, people would sit home and listen to the radio in the same way that afterwards we would sit home and watch television. It is a private event. Typically, we're not watching television with 100 people. We're watching television at home, family, maybe some friends, maybe an extended family. I mean, there are rare exceptions to the rule. I'll give you an example of an exceptional television experience. When I was a freshman in college, I went to the University of Michigan. I lived in the dorm in Ann Arbor, which was which housed a program called the Residential College, which it was basically I was there in the 80s, but this program was pretending it was still the 60s. So this was a point where not every student had a television in their room. I didn't have a television in my dorm room, and to watch television, you had to go to one of the lounges in the dorm. And so usually there would be a few students, with a few minutes to spare watching television, but there were certain nights where the lounge would be packed. And one night in particular, remember, this was a very left-wing dorm on a very left-wing campus. And so I think must have been around 1983 or 1984 where when First Lady Nancy Reagan, this was part of her, was on her anti-drug crusade, which of course included an anti-marijuana crusade. And she hosted on television the re-airing of a movie called Reefer Madness, which talks about the evils of marijuana. Now, the dorm I was in was really at the forefront of the legalization of marijuana in the 80s. So what you can imagine when a group of undergraduates are going to do when anti-drug Nancy Reagan is on television hosting a show talking about the evils of marijuana, there were 100 students packed into that room with a cloud of marijuana smoke so dense you could probably cut it with a knife. And as Nancy Reagan is talking and as the film is airing, neither of which are supposed to be comedic, both of those were received as comedy. But that's not typically how we watch television. I mentioned that as an exception. That was a very public event. Television is very private, much like radio was private. If you think of the fireside chats that FDR would do, he would on the radio, he was targeting those chats to an audience of people who, if they were not literally sitting at home next to their fireplace, they would be sitting in their living room or their den or whatever, listening to the radio. Television is a very similar experience. It's a much more private experience. And I think in some ways it's fashioned that way. Now, when we talk about the presence of Jews on television, we have an interesting progression. Because early on in the history of television, one of the early successful shows on television was a show called The Goldbergs. Now, there was another show called The Goldbergs that debuted on television in 2013. That's something completely different other than the name. But the original show, The Goldbergs, was on from 1949 until 1957. It was about a family, a Jewish family, a visibly and openly Jewish family called the Goldbergs, who lived in a lower middle class apartment in New York City. And basically, it was a caricature of what that first and second generation Jewish life in an apartment building in New York City was like. It was very Jewish. If you go on IMDb and you read the descriptions of each episode, the very first episode starts with the Goldbergs return home from the Catskills and they have an important visitor into their house. It is openly Jewish. Now, I want to watch a clip from the Goldbergs just to give you a sense of the flavor. But then something very interesting is going to happen. Other than the Goldbergs, for maybe 20 more years or almost 20 years, there's almost nothing that visibly Jewish on television. So let's take a look at this short clip from the Goldbergs.
What I smell.
Let me escort you to the magic kitchen.
Come, sir.
Don't touch.
Who's touching?
We're just looking.
Please, don't look. You have plenty to do. Put the jars on, the tops on the jars, and David, darling, you fill up the jars, yes? But no sampling.
No. You have too much fish, Mal, there. Too much fish.
Too much.
The bazaar starts after supper, and everybody will be full. So how much will you be able to sell?
That's right, Ma.
Yeah, the bazaar, please. Around 10 o'clock, everybody gets hungry, and it'll come in handy. So don't touch.
Is the fish done, Molly?
Yes, but don't touch.
Fine, how do you do? Denied fish in my own home.
I wouldn't deny you if the bazaar wasn't of the utmost.
All the jars are filled. There's one piece remains.
So I'll eat it.
Jake, please, that belongs to the bazaar. That fish is money.
All right, I'll buy it. I'm in the mood for fish.
50 cents, please.
50 cents? Molly, this isn't caviar.
Molly's fish is caviar, Jake. It's a bargain.
All right.
Thank you. Well,
It's your fish, Molly. Need I say more?
something smells good. Can I have a taste?
I'll sell you half the portion for a quarter. I'll try to recoup some of my loss.
Thank you. So first you get a sense, I think it's an understatement to say just how Jewish that clip is. That was a very Jewish scene, a very Jewish family, openly Jew. I mean, very culturally Jewish, making gefilte fish, talking about how good the fish is. Can I have a bite? No, you can't. It's all about the food. That is a very Jewish moment on television. But for reasons I will explain in a moment, that kind of theme on a television show is not going to be seen again really until the 70s. So here I would make two comments. First of all, let's ask ourselves who would be able to really appreciate the warm-heartedness and the humor of the scene we just saw. Probably people who are Jewish. First of all, gefilte fish means something different to Jews who have eaten gefilte fish than to anybody else. Certainly in 1950 or the 1950s, when Jews were simply not as mainstream or familiar to other people in America. And so the target audience of this show was primarily a Jewish audience. In that sense, we might say that this show was an extension of the Catskills itself. Now, why would a television show produce itself or present itself to such a narrow audience? This is in the early days of television, and I would suggest that this is a point where it wasn't clear how impactful television as a medium was going to be. Not yet. The notion of nationally broadcast television shows was still something in its infancy. There were news shows that were broadcast nationally. There would be special reports, but shows like this, a sitcom or perhaps a rom-com like this, were something that were more local. And since it was broadcast in New York, it was safe to assume that even if it was tailored only for a Jewish audience, there would be plenty of Jews in New York and even plenty of Jews with a television set in New York who would be able to appreciate this show. It was a very small scale operation. Now, as I said, other than the Goldbergs, most of the television shows, certainly most of the popular television shows, other than that, in the 50s and the 60s, all the way into the beginning of the 70s, have very little in the way of anything Jewish. I mean, ask yourself, was there anything Jewish about the Brady Bunch? Was there anything Jewish about Gunsmoke or Bonanza or Green Acres? I'm just listing shows. These are the shows I happen to love to watch in reruns. No, there wasn't very much that was Jewish about them, but it wasn't only the absence of things Jewish. There was very little about these shows that was diverse or that's what we'd call ethnic in any way. These shows were produced when the producers of television shows were trying to cater to a broader national audience. And they figured that they wanted to keep it as generic as possible. So most of the shows aired prior to the 1970s tended to be characters who were middle class, white, suburban, Christian, although even the Christianness of them was not always that overt. They were that typical, stereotypical melting pot American. And that's what most of these shows were. And it also wasn't even clear where they were. A show like The Brady Bunch is a good example. It probably took place in LA because when they had cameos, they would have LA athletes on the show, but not necessarily. And Greg Brady was always going surfing. So I imagine it was in California, but I don't think they ever actually said it. These were supposed to be these catch-all shows that everyone could relate to. And that was television until the 1970s. And that's why Jews were largely absent from it. Now, the exception, of course, is comedy. And comedy is in some ways a separate category here. So Milton Berle had a show on television. It was comedy. Sid Caesar, that was comedy. Now, one of the reasons this is so is, as I mentioned, that Jews were not something, or being Jewish, Judaism, Jewish identity, what it meant to be Jewish, was not that mainstream until the end of the 1960s. Most people who were not Jewish knew a little bit, but not a lot. And so if something was going to be Jewish on television, it would need to be explained. So prior to the 1970s, and the turning point here, as we'll see in a moment, is going to be Norman Lear. But prior to Norman Lear's television shows, if there was going to be something Jewish as part of an episode of a television show or as part of a television series, it was going to have to be something big and dramatic. It was going to be significant. The very presence of Jews was something significant. So let me give you two examples of that. The first, let me explain it first, and then we'll pull up the clip. The first example comes from a show called The Waltons. Now, you remember The Waltons. I loved The Waltons growing up. Every Thursday at 8 o'clock, I think it was on CBS. The Waltons was, as you may know, The Waltons was a show about a family living in Appalachia, I think West Virginia, during the Great Depression and struggling with the difficulties of the Great Depression. They were a wholesome, traditional family with 5 or 6 children who worked hard, very far removed from the big city, rural America. I'm very much salt of the earth. But there was one episode, exactly one episode, where something Jewish happens on this show. In an episode known as The Ceremony, which is season 1, episode 9. Typically, the show took place on Walton's Mountain, and usually the show would revolve around someone who showed up on Walton's Mountain and how the Waltons would get to know them. So on this particular episode, a family moves into Walton's Mountain. Remember, this is in the 1930s. Now, we as the viewers, we know something about this family that no one else in the show knows. Because in private, this family is talking to each other and explaining to us, the viewers, why they're there. This is a Jewish family that is fleeing from Nazi Germany. And they fled from Germany to America. They've settled in Walton's Mountain, and they chose Walton's Mountain because they think Nazis are coming to America too. So they don't want to live in New York. They want to escape. They're hiding. They're terrified. And on Walton's Mountain, they're not telling anyone that they're Jewish, which wouldn't be such a big deal. It's 2 parents and a child, but the child is approaching his 13th birthday, and the parents have said, you can't have a bar mitzvah because we can't let anyone know you're Jewish. I know, the Waltons. I know you may be surprised that this was on the Waltons. So you know what's going to happen. I mean, the Waltons are going to befriend these people. And of course, the Waltons, being the quintessentially good people they are, they're going to help resolve this problem. But there is one other little twist scene that happens. Remember, these people are they're very anxious and very nervous. The two of the Walton boys, one of them gets a slingshot as a present, and they're walking down the street in front of this family's house, and by accident, they shoot a rock through the window. So the people, this Jewish family fleeing from Nazi Germany, they have a rock come through their window. They're terrified. The Waltons don't know that they're Jewish. These boys, they don't want to get in trouble, so they don't tell anyone that they did it. And not until the end of the episode do they finally straighten out that no, it wasn't someone trying to harass you or persecute you. We did it by mistake, and we're really sorry. But along the way, they befriend the boy. The boy befriends the Waltons' children, and here's what happens. Let's pull up the next clip, The Ceremony from the Waltons.
Why is being 13 so important? Is it some kind of custom in Germany or something?
Not only in Germany, but anywhere in the world if you are...
If you're what?
It is late. I must go.
No, stay here. Paul.
Paul, our daddy's always telling us not to pry into other folks' affairs. And I know that none of us here want to do that. But if something's bothering you and you want to tell somebody about it, then I just want you to know that you can trust all of us.
Come on, tell us why you aren't celebrating your birthday.
Well, you see, I am a Jew.
A Jew? What's that?
It's a religion in the Bible, Ben. You ought to know that.
Jesus was one.
I still don't know what a Jew is.
Does that mean that you believe in special things?
Well, we believe that God created the heaven and the earth and made the mountains and the seas.
We believe that too.
And we believe in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill.
Honor thy father and thy mother.
Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy.
We learned all that in Sunday school.
Yeah.
Seems to me being a Jew isn't all that different from being a Baptist.
Perhaps it is not. Except when you are 13. Then I think it is different.
Well, why is that?
But when a Jewish boy is 13, he has his bar mitzvah.
Bar what?
Bar mitzvah. This is a very solemn ceremony in which celebrates his arrival at manhood. It is performed by a rabbi.
What's a rabbi?
Well, he is something between your minister and a teacher. He is most good and wise about many things. Also, there must be 9 other Jewish men with him. They are called a minyan.
What do they do?
They are witnesses.
Like in court?
For this service, I must say certain prayers which I've been studying for a long time. Also, I must wear special things.
Paul, are Baptists allowed to go to your bar mitzvah?
Anybody is allowed to come if they are your friends.
He's gonna have it.
We're your friends.
I'm afraid that is not possible.
Well, why not?
Well, you see, my father says that we can no longer be Jews.
I still can't figure out what a Jew is.
So you see 2 things are happening in this episode. First of all, it's this boy explaining to the Walton children who've probably never met anyone Jewish before what Jews are. But it's also the show is explaining to a viewing audience, many of whom may know Jews, but they've heard the word bar mitzvah, but were never sure what it actually means. What does it mean to be Jewish versus Christian? This is a show that is enlightening or familiarizing an audience with what Jews are. Now, the ultimate aim of the show is ecumenical in nature. People are people, Jews are people, just like Christians, even if they have different customs. And, spoiler alert, the way the episode ends is the boy winds up having his bar mitzvah ceremony, and it's him and it's his parents and it's the Waltons. That's no surprise there. But that's an example. That was 1972, where it was still necessary to explain to a television audience, people sitting in their homes who aren't Jewish, what Jews are. And that was something very unusual. Now, that was taken, in a sense, I think, to the next level in a show called Bridget Loves Bernie. Bridget Loves Bernie was on in 1972 for 1 season. It starred actually a couple that was married in real life, David Bernie and Meredith Baxter Bernie. David Bernie's Jewish. She is not Jewish. And essentially, this was a show about not only the phenomenon of intermarriage between Jews and Christians, but the difficulty and the challenges of it. Now, this was a romantic comedy. So let's watch the opening little vignette, the opening credits of the show, or the introduction to the show. And then I'll make a couple of comments. Now, there's no dialogue here until the very, very end. What I would emphasize, what you watch for is until the very, very end, it looks like a typical rom-com until the very end. So let's take a look at it.
Crazy.
You know, this is crazy, but I don't even know your full name.
Bernie. Steinberg. What's yours?
Bridget. Bridget, Teresa, Mary, Colleen, Fitzgerald.
I
Think we have a problem.
Until the very end of that clip, it was your typical rom-com, love at first sight. He picks her up in the cab, they meet, the music, all's well. And at the very end, they realize he's Jewish and she's not. And it's no big surprise. They chose an actor who looks very Jewish, and they chose her who looks very not Jewish, and they gave them names which are very clear. Now, this is not just a drama, this is a comedy. So they're dealing with the issue of intermarriage, which was becoming something more people were more aware of, not only in the Jewish community, but beyond, because their families are about as stereotypical as you can get. His parents own a deli. His Uncle Moishi is just what you'd expect from a character named Uncle Moishi. A lot of shtick, a lot of jokes, a lot of deli jokes. Her parents, I mean, they're Catholic, but they're about as Upper East Side New York waspy as you can get, even though technically not wasps. And of course, her brother Mike Fitzgerald is Father Mike. He's a priest, but he's the cool hip priest. So in a lot of ways, her brother and his uncle are the comedic foils for the whole show. And you know, without even watching the show, you can get a sense of what happens on the show. Christmas versus Hanukkah, Passover, Easter. How are we going to raise the children? He comes to their house. She eats in their deli. They learn about each other's lives. They realize they have lots of things in common, but how are they going to work out these differences? The show only lasted a season. In many ways, the show was canceled under the weight of its own predictability, even though I have to admit, I did watch the whole season of that show. I thought it was terrific, but not that many people did. But I think this and The Waltons, they're both examples of how at this point, if you're going to have someone Jewish or a Jewish theme on the show, it's going to have to be explained. It's going to be something new. It's an anomaly. It itself is the show. Since then, we have the beginnings of Jews, Jewish characters, being Jewish, and aspects of Judaism, which are going to become more and more mainstream. And like I said, this begins with Norman Lear. Now, Norman Lear was the creator of shows like All in the Family, The Jeffersons, Good Times. What he's really going to do is he's going to root his shows not only in a particular place, typically New York City, but also in the events of the present. He's going to deal with present day issues, and really the first show that's going to deal in a serious way, even though these are sitcoms, with issues that are not sort of larger generic issues like being nice to each other and family values, but real issues like prejudice, racism, misogyny. I mean, All in the Family, in one of the first episodes, Edith goes through menopause, and she helps Archie has to learn how to deal with that. Very serious things. And in that context, in some episodes, Norman Lear is dealing with issues of ethnic and religious diversity and prejudice and discrimination. So let's look at a clip. One of the first times we see Archie Bunker, and Archie Bunker has become a kind of metonym for that sort of older man who's a bigot and has trouble changing his ideas and his values, kind of out of sync with a greater sense of inclusion. And he is repeatedly just bigoted towards everybody. He's an equal opportunity offender. But in this particular one, he gets caught a little mishap offending someone because of something he says negative about Jews. So let's take a look at the episode known as Archie is Branded.
Hey, you got the coffee made out there?
Yeah, Archie.
Did you bring in the Sun's paper?
No, not yet.
She knows it's out there. She leaves it there. Well, what are you gonna do? Can't teach an old dingbat new tricks. Eat it.
I'm sorry I'm late, Archie. Here's your breakfast.
Never mind the breakfast. Come over here and take a look at the front door.
Oh, my. Who did that?
I wouldn't know, Edith. The artist didn't sign it. I'm calling the cops.
Yeah, call the cops. That's a good idea.
Calling the cops? What's going on?
Look at the door.
Yeah?
You meathead, open the door and look on the outside.
You didn't tell me to open the door. All you said was look at the door. You didn't say open the door and look at it from the outside. All you said was look at the door.
Open the damn door and look at the outside.
All right. You didn't say open the door.
Open it.
Swastika. Hey, Gloria, did you see this?
What? Oh, Michael, who could have done that?
Probably the same crummy kids that busted the street lamp last week.
I wonder if they did it to any of the other houses. I'm gonna look.
Who cares? I know they done it to my house, and they ain't getting away with it. I'm calling the cops. Hello? Hello, is this... How do you like this? I call the cops, I get a recorded announcement here. The lines are all busy. Do not hang up the phone. Your call will be answered when the lines are clear. The lines would be clear if they wasn't playing records.
Michael, did they paint any of the other doors on the block?
No, just this house.
Why do kids do things like that?
Gloria, I don't think it's kids. There's a lot of fanatics running around loose these days.
Who cares? Whoever done it, I'm gonna get him for it, that's all. Now here, you stay on the blower till the cops answer.
All right.
What about you, little girl? You hear anything last night when you were sleeping? The cops are gonna want to know that when they get here.
No, Daddy. All I heard was your alarm clock when it went off this morning.
And that's another thing. Why did the alarm clock go off of a Sunday morning? Huh? I was out of bed and halfway to the toilet before I remembered I didn't have to get up.
I'm sorry, Archie, but I wanted to get up and put a cake in the oven for Louise Jefferson. It's her anniversary tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Why are you ringing the alarm for today?
Well, I figured if the cake didn't turn out good today, I'd have another chance at it.
Oh. Why do I ask her anything?
Hey, Arch, I got the police.
All right, give me the phone.
Hold on a second.
Give me the phone there. Hello, the police? Yeah, this is Archie Buck of 704 Houser Street. Now, well, I got a complaint. Last night, sometime during the night, someone come around here and painted a swastika on my front door. Swastika. Swastika. No, one of them German things from World War II. Yeah, well, can you come over? All right, good. That's all I want. Yeah, thanks very much. All right, we'll get to the bottom of this. The cops are going to come over. They're going to have a little investigation.
Oh, I better get something to wipe that off the door.
So where this episode goes, it turns out that this wasn't a random act of graffiti, that they have a Jewish neighbor who was the object of this. He was the target of this swastika, and they accidentally painted it on Archie's door instead of this other guy's door. But this is the point where Archie is very insistent to the police officer, to the other people later in the episode, that he's not Jewish. He doesn't know why this is done to him. He's a World War II vet. He's outraged because of that. Isn't there anything they can do? And the way the episode winds up is that Archie just wants to report to the police and forget about it. But he gets a visit from a representative of the JDL, the Jewish Defense League. This I couldn't find a clip for. And this representative, he's concerned about his Jewish neighbor, and he wants Archie to help organize the block in support of the Jewish neighbor. Archie doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't consider it his problem. He's more aloof from that. And this is the first of several times on the show where Archie's, he has a sort of ambivalence towards Jews. He's not aggressively trying to persecute them, but they're just not someone who's very much part of his world. It's not his problem. He doesn't really want to get involved. And if something happens to his Jewish neighbor, why should he care? Now, later in the series, there's an interesting twist on his sort of his lukewarm or indifferent attitude towards Jews, where a close friend of his on the series, Stretch Cunningham, who is the funny guy at work, it's the tall, lanky guy at work, played by James Cromwell. There's an episode where he dies, and Archie goes to his funeral because one of the in his will, Stretch Cunningham asked Archie to say a few words at Stretch Cunningham's funeral. And Archie, of course, is perfectly happy to do it because this is one of his buddies from work and they go out to have beers afterwards. He's the funniest guy Archie knows. When he gets to the funeral, he gets a little bit of a surprise. So let's play a little clip from that funeral.
Archie, Stretch Cunningham is dead.
What?
That was Hank Pivnick. He called to tell us.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Come on, made a mistake. This is a funeral for a Jewish guy.
Wait, there's Mr. Moore.
Mr. Bunker, I'm so glad you're here. We're just about ready for you. Here's your yarmulke.
Wait a minute. What's going on here?
Stretch must have been Jewish.
Stretch Jewish with a name like Cunningham?
Oh, Archie, what's in the name?
A Jewish name ain't supposed to have no ham in it. I can't believe this. If he was really Jewish, why didn't he tell some of his closest buddies? It wouldn't have made no difference.
Maybe he thought it would.
Friends, we are here today to say farewell to Jerome Cunningham, beloved son of Chaim Kornheimer. A close friend of Jerome's is here today to say some parting words. Mr. Archie Bunker.
Wait a minute, don't forget your beanie.
I worked shoulder to shoulder with Stretch for 11, 12 years, and I knew him good. Well, not as good as I thought. I wish I'd have knew he was Jewish because there was an awful lot of remarks and jokes passed around a job. You know, some of the other guys was great for that, you know. Not that Stretch ever felt bad. He was one of them up guys, you know, one of them uppest guys you ever met. See, he's always laughing, telling jokes himself. Many is Jewish jokes he told. I wouldn't have believed that Stretch was a Jew, you know, because after all, I mean, he wasn't a doctor or a lawyer in the dress business, nothing like that. He was just like myself. He was just an ordinary, hard-working stiff. And hard-working union man. I better wind this up. I heard it said that the blues, you know, having the blues takes years off of your life. And if that's true, then it must be true that laughing puts years on your life. And if that's true, then Stretch put some years on my life. And you gotta love a guy for doing that. So, Stretch, Jerome, unless you're down at this end here. I only wish that while he was living, that I made you laugh a little more.
Now, when we look past the comedy of it is Archie Bunker wearing a kippah. So that's funny. But and then there's the moving part about, of course, Archie Bunker saying shalom at the end. But the larger point, and really what Norman Lear is trying to do in this episode is he's taking a stereotypical bigot like Archie Bunker, and he's showing how through the course of the show, this is all the way in season 7, Archie Bunker this is what we call experiencing personal growth. This wouldn't have seen this in Archie Bunker in season 1, but by the end of the show, this is the latest in a series of where Archie Bunker has come to become more tolerant, more accepting of people. He's still Archie Bunker even at the end, but he's having this moment of realizing that people, even if they're different, he's still Stretch Cunningham. Even if he wasn't Jerome Konheimer, he's still Stretch Cunningham. He's still Archie's friend, that they have as much in common as they have things that are different between them. That was a powerful moment on television. I would suggest that, before Norman Lear, nobody tried that. Nobody had a main character preside unexpectedly over a Jewish funeral of a funeral of a Jewish friend and say something that kindred and that heartfelt and that personal, and really, traversing the difference between being Jewish and Christian. And it was just friend to friend. Sociologists of Judaism call that phenomenon the neutral society, the emergence or the appearance of a realm of relationships where Jews and non-Jews can relate to each other as friend to friend. And that's what Archie Bunker's doing. Now, that was in 1977. If we fast forward 15, 20 years closer to the present, we see this as really the beginning of the mainstreaming of Jews, where being Jewish is something which doesn't, the presence of Jews in a show or a storyline or an episode isn't itself some big splash, but it's woven more broadly into the larger themes of the show, the mainstreaming of Jews, the mainstreaming of Jewishness. So let me wind up today by giving 2 examples of that. The first comes from the HBO comedy, or the HBO rom-com Sex and the City. Now, Sex and the City, if you haven't seen it, it's about 4 single women in New York, and really about their search for personal happiness, whether that means a relationship, marriage, or being happy not married, whatever. And they're all very different. Of the 4, the waspiest of the 4, the most, we would say, the most Gentile of the 4 is Charlotte York. And Charlotte York, all she wants to do is find a nice, rich young fellow like herself. And her first marriage is to Trey, who's played by Kyle MacLachlan, who looks just as waspy as she does. And the marriage is an absolute disaster. But what happens next is, she winds up falling in love with her Jewish divorce lawyer, and the 2 of them wind up getting married. So and to do that, Charlotte has to convert to Judaism. So let's look at a moment early in that transitional period of that relationship between her and her soon-to-be fiance, but also more importantly, when she goes to talk to a rabbi about converting to Judaism.
Woo, it's hot.
Excuse me?
Outside. I'm schwitzing like a pudding at a picnic. So, this is the pagoda we've been fighting over, huh? Believe me, I never thought a shiksa goddess like you would fall for a putz like me.
You're not a putz.
Do you even know what putz means?
Yes. Schmuck.
You sure you're not Jewish?
The next day, Charlotte boldly went where no York had gone before, the synagogue.
Shalom. Where would I find the rabbi?
His study, inside.
Thank you. Are you the rabbi?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Charlotte York, and I'm here today because I would like to consider joining the Jewish faith.
We're not interested.
Hello, I need to report a very rude man. I was just saying that my name is Charlotte York, and I would like to consider joining the Jewish faith.
And after 3 unreturned phone calls, Charlotte decided to make a house call.
Hello, Rabbi. I brought you some kosher wine.
sorry, but my husband can't see you now.
Excuse me, I don't mean to be rude, but I think he can. Look, I'm 37 years old. I'm reproductively challenged. I'm in love with a Jewish person, and it took me 20 years to find him. I don't have time to play these games.
All right, Charlotte. Lesson number 1. You have to give it a rest because it's about to be Sabbath, the day of rest. You want to be a Jew? Sit. Watch. Learn.
Oh, that is so sweet. But actually, I'm supposed to meet my boyfriend. I can skip it.
Come, girls, gather.
Sorry.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. Okay, but I can't stay out late because I have a 9 a.m. conversion class at the synagogue. You had a 2-hour class today. I know. I'm accelerating my studies. There's just so much to take in. The history, the tradition, the philosophy. Oi! You guys! That was my first oi!
Except this one. We're keeping this. What the hell? They were Jews too. Dreidel, dreidel, dreidel. I made it out of clay. And when it's something, something.
Dry and ready.
Impressive. Dry and ready. Oh, dreidel, I will play.
Okay. The kugel's in the oven. The matzo balls are boiling. It's 3 hours till Shabbos. I think we should start braiding the challah.
Doesn't Shabbos mean day of rest, i.e. ordering in?
Aren't you counting your matzo balls before they rise?
Miranda, zip the lip.
Harry and I have an understanding about our future. We don't have to talk about it all the time. It's but shared.
I don't know what that means.
It's meant to be.
Now, I think what's beyond the fact that the most, well, for lack of a better term, the most goyish of the characters on the show is becoming Jewish enthusiastically. The reason on the show she originally decides to convert is that she can't have children, and when they're getting more serious, and he's talking about maybe having children, how much he wants to, he tells her that she tells him that she can't, and he's very compassionate about it. He goes, "No problem, we'll adopt," and she's very moved by how compassionate he is. And the voiceover says, Charlotte realized if this is Jewish, maybe it's worth giving a nice look. The other thing is, in terms of the conversion ritual she goes through, that's a very real thing. When someone comes to convert to Judaism, they are refused 3 times, just like she is. For the reason to make sure the person is converting for the right reason. So this is a very accurate portrayal of someone becoming Jewish. And on the show, they have a couple more bumps along the way, but they wind up living happily ever after. And ultimately, he's actually able together, they actually have children that she thought she would never have. They adopt the first, but she gives birth to the second one. It's a very happy ending part of the show. So there's one last example I want to show of this mainstreaming of things Jewish, because in Sex and the City, that would not have worked unless the audience had a certain familiarity with what it means to convert to Judaism and the differences and what it means, the talk to the rabbi, the Friday night dinner scene. There has to be a certain familiarity. That wouldn't have worked early on. The last example I want to give comes from a show called Orange is the New Black, which takes place predominantly in a women's prison. Now, in this particular storyline, some of the women in the prison they don't like the food is lousy because it's prison food, but they've discovered for the women who keep kosher, they get special kosher food. And, normally we'd think, kosher food means, I don't know, airplane food. But in this particular instance, kosher food means more fresh produce In other words, the quality of kosher food that the prison provides to people who keep kosher is better than the regular food. So you have inmates who aren't Jewish pretending or wanting, announcing that they want to be Jewish, mainly for the kosher food. But one character in particular who starts out that way, it actually leads her to discovering things about Judaism in a very powerful moment. So let's look at that last clip.
Can I be a Jew?
You really want this? Sincerely. Not because this one's trying to blackmail me for something stupid when I was 19, or for broccoli with your dinner. What is this for you?
Honestly, I think I found my people. I was raised in a church where I was told to believe and pray. And if I was bad, I go to hell. If I was good, I go to heaven. And if I asked Jesus, he'd forgive me, and that was that. And here y'all saying ain't no hell. Ain't sure about heaven. And if you do something wrong, you got to figure it out yourself. And as far as God's concerned, it's your job to keep asking questions and to keep learning and to keep arguing. It's like a verb. It's like you do God. And that's a lot of work. But I think I'm in, at least as far as I can see it. I mean, maybe I'll learn more and say, fuck the whole thing. I mean, but I want to learn more, and I think I got to be in it to do that. You know, does that make sense? Shit, did I just talk myself out of it?
Ask me again.
Can I be a Jew?
Yes.
No, I need 3 answers.
Yes. Yes.
Look at me now, I'm a bona fide Jew.
Sort of. It's not really official without the mikveh, but that was wonderful. Really, Tova. Congratulations.
What?
Oh, it's like a baptism, but without all the touching. You soak in a pool and you clean off all that Christian filth that you've been carrying around.
We can fake that shit in the shower.
No, that won't count.
The mikveh needs to be pure, naturally occurring water, and you need to be fully submerged and nude.
Yeah. Maybe it'll rain, okay? We can just, there'll be a sinkhole or something. And we'll make it official then. In the meantime, you are Jewish, huh?
See, with both her and with Charlotte, they each came to the idea for a very specific reason. Charlotte to get married and her to be able to have better food in prison, but they both wound up falling in love with the religion. And really the larger message here is that being Jewish is something that's familiar to enough people. Not that everyone wants to be Jewish, but the idea of becoming Jewish is something that, of being Jewish, is something that is mainstream enough or familiar enough to enough people watching television and the television audience that you can have a powerful episode on a TV show like that. The other thing I would say is that in this show, a lot of what the inmates are doing are confronting the problems of their own lives, the problems of their own identities, the challenges they've had, and they're in prison not only because they committed a crime, but this whole process of rehabilitation is an internal and inward personal rehabilitation. During the course of the show, they're genuinely trying to figure out a way to make themselves better people. And so we've gone from the situation where Jews are barely on television, other than the Goldbergs, which is sort of older and more caricature, into a point by the 21st century where on television, Jews and being Jewish and Jewish values are very much part of being on television. And now we could list dozens of shows where having a Jewish character is just something natural. Sometimes it's stated, sometimes it's not. Now, next week, when we come back, we're going to look in what may be the flip side of this. We're going to look at manifestations of anti-Semitism on television shows. That we will turn to next week. So I think I can leave the last couple of minutes if there are any. I didn't see any questions in the chat. But if anyone has any other questions out there.
There were a couple. So a couple of questions that are very short ones. One was about the Goldbergs previously being a radio program.
Yes, the Goldbergs, like other early shows, started on the radio and was able to make the transition to television.
Another quick question was Bridget Loves Bernie inspired by Abby's Irish Rose?
Thank you. I meant to say that Abby's Irish Rose was the inspiration for Bridget Loves Bernie. Bridget Loves Bernie tried to transplant it to television. It never had the success as Abby's Irish Rose.
And one last question, which might be too big to cover in a minute or so, but let's try, is this flip side, this transition from not being mentioned and not being known to everyone knowing about Jews and Jewish people. Did that, how do you explain that? Like, or did it
well, one of the things we will see next week, all that is going to be rooted in, let's call it the ethnic revival of the 1960s. Everyone is searching for their roots. Everyone is discovering who they are, even if they're not really part of that anymore. And part of that explosion of the celebration of ethnicity is going to be the celebration of Jewish ethnicity. And as part of the celebration of Jewish ethnicity is being Jewish is something which can be splashed across a TV screen or a movie screen, or without it having to be a big fanfare. You can have a Jewish family or a Jewish character without having them be fleeing from Nazis, or without it being about, some controversial intermarriage type of thing, or a swastika. It can just be something much more ordinary and mundane. Jews become more part of mainstream American society. Jewish characters become more part of mainstream American culture.
Beautiful. Okay. Yes.
No, go ahead.
No, there's just one question here. What do we make of the fact that the image of the swastika on the door got a big laugh from the audience? Like, I think for the people watching now, that's it's a strange,
right, very triggering in certain ways. I think it gets the big laugh. First of all, the audience for All in the Family, the live studio audience was predominantly a Jewish audience that knew that Norman Lear was not an anti-Semite, that the show was not anti-Semitic. And it was partly the shock value of seeing it, but also the humor is that of all people, Archie Bunker, the bigot, he has the swastika on his door. Now, the rest of the episode gets more serious when they find out that it was targeting the Jewish neighbor and things like that. But at this point, it's just the irony, the surprise, the humor is that Archie Bunker opens his door and sees the swastika there. He's probably the least likely on the block to have a swastika. Why wasn't it at the Jeffersons? Why wasn't it at the Jewish neighbor? So it wasn't in any way downplaying what the swastika is. On the contrary, we also have Archie Bunker explaining to the police on the phone what a swastika is. So I think that's where the humor and that moment comes, the surprise and the irony.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'll echo all the comments here, and thank you for a lovely program. I think I can say for all of us, we're looking forward to the next in this series on Sunday next week, and you're all more than welcome, and we'll be happy to see you on Tuesday for the part 1 of the series Jews on the Silver Screen. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely day, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.